All right, thank you. Hello, everyone, and sorry that I can't be with you there today. My name is Brendon, and I'm the Director of Advocacy here at AARP Arizona. And it is always a pleasure for us to participate in the Caregiver Day at the Capitol, but unfortunately, sometimes just things get in the way. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into the presentation. We're going to talk to you a little bit about advocacy and some of the work that we do and some of the stuff that we've been working on, and hopefully we'll be able to give you a good overview of sort of the work that we do and kind of what we've been working on, and talk about a few key pieces of legislation. And can you see my screen just so that way I can? Okay, great, perfect. So like I said, my name is Brendon, and I'm the Director of Advocacy with AARP Arizona. And we do work at the state legislature every single year as a key factor of our work, and caregivers and long-term care have always been a major component of some of the work that we do. So what we'll talk a little bit about today is we'll talk about our priorities. We'll talk about the state legislature and where we're at with that process. And also we'll talk about where you can provide input as well. So let's start with where we help out. A little bit about our process is that every year we'll establish a list of some of our biggest priority issue areas. In previous years, we have done things like long-term care as a major priority, as it is every single year. Prescription drugs was a major priority for AARP this last year at the federal level. So we established that list of priorities that we want to work on, and a lot goes into that decision-making process, whether it's who's talking about this issue. If there's a lot of people talking about it, then it can maybe be a little bit lower on our priority list because there are other advocates doing that work. But in the case of long-term care, there are very few organizations that are really looking out for caregivers like ourselves and the Caregiver Coalition and others like the Alzheimer's Association. There are some organizations that are doing a lot of that work, but some legislators aren't as up to date on these issues. Unless they've been through a caregiving journey themselves, they just don't have that base level of knowledge to sort of understand some of the issues. And so we try to provide a lot of education around some of these issues. We'll inform our volunteers, our e-activists, our members and legislators about our priorities. And we'll even do some work before the session in order for us to make strides. That's one thing about doing legislative work is you planning ahead is a huge part about that. So in terms of what we've worked on this year, we've been tracking about 48 bills this session. We have a number of them that we are more or less involved with, but essentially there are sophisticated systems that allow you to track pieces of legislation. And we try to utilize those tools so that way we can make sure that we're prepared in making sure we're not missing something. If a piece of legislation is moving that it hurts caregivers, whether or lower standards for caring for loved ones in long-term care facilities, or whatever the case may be, we want to make sure that we're being a part of those conversations. So that way we can inform stakeholders and legislators about any potential unintended consequences that may be as a result of some of the language in the bills. We get really into the weeds on some of these things. So this year, we can talk mostly about three areas that we've really worked on. Long-term care, as I mentioned before, is our top priority. It's something that we work on every single year. And as you all would know, there's a lot of work we can do, whether it's around home and community-based services, making sure that you as caregivers in the home have the resources that you need to have respite services available when you need it, or just simply having support in your own homes, whether it be financial support through something like the Caregiver Grant Program, or it's other support with having a caregiver come in and help. We want to make sure that caregivers are well taken care of, and also that if you do have a loved one in a long-term care facility, that they're being properly cared for. So the second issue that we could talk about, and this is a more global one, that's probably one of the biggest issues that the legislature this year has been talking about housing. There is so much going on with housing, and from an AARP perspective, older adults, specifically older Arizonans, are the fastest group that's experiencing homelessness, and most of whom are doing so for the very first time. In Phoenix, it's great that we've seen such development in our city and in our state, and we've seen a lot of money come into our state. But the double-edged sword to that is that things get more expensive, people get priced out. People who moved here, especially seniors who moved here to retire, did so with a budget in mind, that the cost of living 10, 15 years ago when they moved here, and the inflation being what it was at that time, certainly changed. As we've been the fastest growing county here in Maricopa County over the last decade, and we're only going to see those numbers increase. AARP and others have been calling us a silver tsunami. So housing is a huge importance to us. Transportation is another big issue, and it's specifically a big issue for here in Maricopa County. We have a 20-year sales tax called Prop 400, which has helped build our freeway system. It's helped maintain our arterial streets. And it's also been a major contributor to building and maintaining the light rail and buses and things like that. And AARP believes that as people age, they need to be able to maintain their independence, even if that means they can't drive. So we like to support policies that increase options for transportation, so that way you're able to still get around, maintain your independence, even if you can't drive anymore. So talking about the state legislature, we follow a deadline here. There have been over 1,500 bills introduced this year at the state legislature. And as I mentioned earlier, we're only tracking about 50 of them. The legislature, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the phrase, nothing gets done without a deadline. And so that's why the legislature moves. We have deadlines that essentially kill bills along the process if they haven't moved fast enough. So we just had one such deadline in mid-February that if you did not have your bill heard, if it's a non-appropriations bill, if it hasn't been heard in its committee of origin, in its house of origin, then it dies. And the best bet is either try again next year or figure out something that's a legislative maneuver called a striker. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Then we have what's called crossover week. That's kind of where we're at right now. And then you have the last day to hear bills in the opposite chamber coming up at in the third week of March or so. After that, after the session has been in for about 100 days in mid-April, then it's all budget negotiations, and that happens basically from then until sine die, which is supposed to be before July 1st. And so they always say don't make any vacation plans if you are in this work until then. So we'll see where we end up this year. Apparently there's always a pool a pool of money that people and lobbyists bet on to figure out when that date's going to be, and they get pretty specific with it. So it's pretty funny inside game there, little inside baseball. All right, so let's talk about state legislators and some of the new faces. If any of you were at my presentation last year, I had the very same slide, and it's just because we have a lot of new legislators. We had a lot last year, whether it be for a number of issues or things that had happened. But this year it's because we had a ton of folks that were newly elected. We have a lot of freshmen, and there's also a lot of people who are back that either weren't in the last 2 years or a couple of years prior. I've heard that they're being called red shirt freshmen, so because they've been around, but they're back, and so they're new. It's kind of a weird dynamic, but the breakdown is the same that it's been for the last 2 years. We have 90 total legislators, and the Republicans have a 1-vote majority in both. So if one Republican votes against or abstains from a vote, then that means that they can't pass their agenda. They've been able to do that a couple of times with what are called skinny budgets to try to give the governor something that she can sign that basically just is a continuation of what we did last year. Obviously, she has vetoed that as we now have a new dynamic of having a split government, with the legislature being controlled by Republicans and the governor being controlled by a Democrat. So, but like I said, an absolute ton of new legislators. So let's talk about some of the important bills that we got going on. We'll start on the Senate side with Senate Bill 1199. This is in the case that if you were to have a wrongful death and you were to be awarded a wrongful death suit in court, for an issue in long-term care facilities, for instance, that you wouldn't be necessarily on the hook to pay the legal fees for that. Something that AARP is supporting. And the next couple of bills that we'll talk about are a pair of bills from the Alzheimer's Association. Our friends over there are running these bills that we're supportive of. This is 2087 and 1220. So this is House Bill 2087, which is sponsored by Representative Tim Dunn. He is running this bill for appropriation awareness or appropriations for dementia awareness, which is just to get the word out there that this is a major issue in our state, and it's a growing problem. You know, my wife is a neuropsychologist, and she is and she works in dementia and Alzheimer's. So she sees this, and we talk about it when she gets home from work. And it's a constant discussion between the two of us that we've kind of ended up in this work together. But it's so necessary that we need to elevate the issue of dementia and Alzheimer's in our state, so that way we can continue to talk about it. And along those lines, Senate Bill 1220, sponsored by Senator TJ Shope, this will create a state plan for dementia and will allocate money to support that. So in addition, we've got House Bill 2197. This is Representative Justin Wilmoth. He is trying to make the process easier as it relates to electronic wills, because, you know, in those situations, the last thing you want to worry about is some technicalities. And so this is just trying to make that easier. And lastly, we have another bill, 1293, which is on long-term care facilities and inspections. This one we don't have a position on right now, but we're certainly we'd love to work with the sponsor on some stuff. But this is an attempt to try to increase the amount of inspections that are happening in long-term care facilities. There was an an Auditor General's report that was released last May that really clearly outlined that the Department of Health is not doing its job, that they are lowering the priority status of claims of abuse and neglect to lower status, and then just ultimately not investigating them. It's a major crisis. It's something that we have been working with and talked about on the campaign trail. When we did our candidate-related efforts, we spoke to both candidates for the Attorney General's office specifically about this issue, because it's such a critical thing that we have to have. We're hoping to work with whoever the next Department of Health Services deputy or director is, so that way we can work with them and figure out solutions and how to get the department to hire folks. We were able to get them money a few years ago to hire more folks to do more investigations, but that money has not been spent yet. So, and what you don't see is you don't see stuff from the budget. Because what happened is during those budget negotiations, if a bill didn't make it through the process, something like home and community-based services fundings for the AAAs, that's something that you won't see on this list here, but you can almost guarantee that it's going to be in the budget because it's been in the budget every other year. So, but it's not necessarily going to come from a bill. It's just going to be money that gets allocated. And so there's always another way. There's always maneuvers you can do to get pieces of legislation through. So it's important to remember that. So let's talk about how you can get involved. You can contact your legislator, call or email. They respond more to you as the constituent than to me as a lobbyist, because you're not paid and I am. And I think that as crass as that is, it's a clear distinction for a legislator that you're somebody in their district that votes. So here's how you find your legislator. You go to azledge.gov. Then you look on the members tab. It's right there at they've got 5 tabs that are laid out across the screen. And then you click on who's my legislator, and then you follow the link. You'll click on option number 2 when you follow the link, if you don't, because in this case, you don't know your legislator. And then you go back and you enter your address, you go back and you find them. You can also join the request to speak system. This is what allows you to sign in support or opposition to bills, or go down to the Capitol and have your voice heard in a committee. Lastly, you can join an organization. You can join an organization like ours or another organization that lets you know about some of the biggest bills that are coming up on some of these issues that you care about. And it's important to find organizations that, you know, talk about those kinds of issues. So with that being said, I wish I could take some of your questions, but I do have my email there so that you're free. Feel free to email me I had my phone number at the beginning slide, so feel free to text or call me as well. We try to make ourselves available. But thank you so much for your time today, and this is such a wonderful event, and we're honored to be a part of it every single year. So thank you so much, everybody.